Hi, welcome to the QA orientation. I'm going to share my screen here. And I hope everybody can see this. As I said, welcome to the quality assurance or the QA orientation. My name is Ian Harrison. I work on the governance team as their QA specialist. And today we are going to be talking about QA. Quick rundown of the agenda. First, we're going to talk about getting started with QA. Then we're going to move on to the QA standards. We're going to talk about tools and technical information on the platform, which are relevant to QA. And there should be time for questions and discussion. So let's get started with QA. Just to give you an overview of the platform testing goals, we want to validate that the business goals of the product team have been met, and we want to verify that the functionality of the product satisfies the acceptance criteria and behaves as intended. Probably what you expected, more or less. A little bit more information about platform strategy and philosophy. Each VFS team or each veteran-facing services team is responsible for testing its products. That means you write the tests and you execute them too. Test early and often, always good practice, and use multiple test types as appropriate. A word about the QA process, at least as applies to what we're talking about here. All VFS products move through the collaboration cycle before launch. I'm not sure if you have heard about the collaboration cycle in other orientations, but just to give you an overview that is relevant for this presentation, the collaboration cycle is a series of touch points where VFS teams meet with the governance team to present their product and receive feedback about the product. And at the final touch point, QA comes into the picture. Does not participate in the previous touch points. The final touch point is called the staging review touch point. And at this touch point, the platform QA standards are evaluated. And we're going to be talking more about exactly what the QA standards are in a moment, but just keep in mind that at the staging review, the last touch point, the QA standards are evaluated. So the QA standards, this is really the heart of QA on the platform. We're going to be talking about specifically what they are and their importance. I just did want to mention up front, always be aware that the platform QA standards are an evolving set of standards. They change from time to time, and so always keep an eye out. And this is, I'm going to give you a picture of how things stand right now. Now, the first QA standard that we're going to talk about is the regression plan. A regression plan it's a suite of test scenarios that covers the baseline functionality of your product before you made any changes or before your current development effort. And it's not launch blocking. And when we say not launch blocking, what we mean is if you don't have a regression plan, your product can still launch. If it were launch blocking, then if you did not have it, your product could not launch. And each standard is either launch blocking or not launch blocking. But a regression test plan is important because it's going to help you ensure that you don't introduce bugs or deficiencies into your product. And that's why it's strongly recommended that you do have one. And like I said, keep in mind that although it's not launch blocking now, it may be in the future. Closely related to the regression plan is a test plan. And as you might guess, a test plan covers the changes to your product. It covers what you're launching or what you want to launch on the platform, on the VA.gov platform. And the tests in your test plan are going to help you cover your user stories. So you should have in your test plan tests that are going to map to your user stories. And when you execute the tests in your test plan, you can demonstrate that the user stories acceptance criteria have been met. And consistent with this overall strategy of testing on the platform, a VFS team engineer or team member will execute the tests. It's not governance team. It's not someone else outside of your team who executes the tests. We trust you to execute them and to report back the results. And the output of a test plan is a report that details the test results. So it's easy to see which tests passed, which ones failed. And it's a very useful artifact to have, but it's not launch blocking, at least not yet. But definitely strongly encourage teams to include a test plan as part of their development process. Now we come to traceability reports, which in some sense are a summary of what we just talked about in the test plan. It's important when you're testing to have a comprehensive test plan. And how do you know you have a comprehensive test plan? It's by, at least one way is by covering all the user stories that you've written for your product. So if your test plan can map to user stories, then that's a good thing. And so we have an artifact called the coverage for references as part of the traceability reports. The coverage for references is a report that demonstrates that the stories are covered by your test plan. And in effect, it boils down to a percentage, what percentage of your test cases, or another way of saying is what percentage of your user stories are covered by your test cases. And a similar artifact, which is also part of the traceability reports, another component is the summary of defects. And this demonstrates that the defects you discovered during your QA testing were discovered by executing tests. If all the defects or all the bugs were discovered in this way, then that indicates that you have a comprehensive test plan. Again, this is these are good metrics by which you can evaluate your test plan and your testing strategy in general. This is not a launch blocking standard, much like the previous two, and that is in some ways necessary, since if you didn't have to have a test plan, you couldn't be also required to have traceability reports, but it's strongly encouraged in the same way that the previous two were. Now we come to end-to-end test participation, and this is our first launch blocking standard. So end-to-end tests. A VFS product must have at least one end-to-end test specification or one test file with at least one test. And this is going to test the behavior of your product in as natural a environment as possible. On the platform, all our end-to-end tests are written in Cypress. And again, this is an important standard, and it's launch blocking. So if you don't have that end-to-end test specification, you cannot launch onto the platform. Now, related standard, unit test coverage. Unit test coverage is the product must have at least 80% test coverage in each category: lines, functions, statements, and branches. And this is launch blocking. I should slight caveat, this goes into effect October 12th, 2023, a few days from when this is being recorded. So it's possible that this is not yet launch blocking, but in overwhelming likelihood that it is as you watch this. So again, you have to have 80% test coverage in each of the categories, and it is launch blocking. So right now, the end-to-end tests and the unit tests are the only launch blocking standards, but just want to remind everybody to just sort of keep on your toes for changes to the QA standards. Now, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about tools and technical information that will help you prepare yourself for the staging review, for generating QA standards, and for just making sure that your product is as robust as possible. The first tool is something called TestRail. Now, we talked earlier briefly about your test plan and your regression plan and the traceability reports. And we didn't specify the form that these need to be generated. One tool that can help you generate them is TestRail. It basically helps you organize manual testing of a product. And this is the recommended product on platform. And as I alluded to a moment ago, it can create regression plans, test plans, and traceability reports. So TestRail is a web app, and it allows you to do some useful things like grouping test cases into test plans, which means that you can use that information to generate different test runs with various configurations. Normally, when you test, for example, you're going to want to test different browsers, different operating systems, mobile versus desktop, and different configurations, and then apply them to a standard set of tests. And TestRail is set up to allow you to do that fairly easily, so it's good. The other good thing is that after you do enter or execute your tests, you can generate traceability reports automatically. So you basically get these for free. And TestRail also has plugins to pull in user stories from ZenHub and other sources too, which can make writing your test plan or generating your test plans to start off with easier again. But I did want to mention that you are not required to use TestRail. It's a tool that the platform makes available and recommends, but if your team for some reason does not want to use TestRail, the artifacts we talked about can still be generated in other ways. The key is that you provide the information, but TestRail can make your life easier. There are additional resources on the platform website about how you can use TestRail on platform. There's a little bit of a learning curve with any new product, but the documentation that has been compiled and put on the website will hopefully help you get up and running as fast as possible. Now, I want to move on to something that is not directly related to the QA standards or to the collaboration cycle, but which does tie into QA in general and into your development efforts in particular. And that's the tests in the continuous integration, or the CI pipeline. And by tests, I'm talking about the unit tests and the end-to-end tests. So everything, all the tests, end-to-end and unit tests, they run in a GitHub Action CI/CD workflow. Now, you may not have worked much with GitHub Actions before, but essentially the CI workflow includes a series of jobs for tests, among other things. But whenever you open a pull request, if you want to merge something, the tests are going to run, and all the tests must pass for a pull request to be merged into the main branch. And there are a lot of tests on platform right now. There's several thousand, multiple thousand unit tests and 600 or 700 end-to-end tests. So that's a lot of tests that have to pass. And you can imagine if just one of those tests fails, you can't merge, and that could cause problems for your development. Now, when you do begin developing and you want to verify that the tests are passing, you will see, for example, this is a screenshot on the left here from the workflow, the GitHub Action workflow that gets triggered when you open a pull request. And you'll see that there's Cypress test, a variety of Cypress tests, job 0, 1, 2, 3. That's because the Cypress tests are split up into multiple jobs to increase the speed at which they're completed. But the point is, after all these jobs run, you will then be able to see a summary you can see the circled link here that says this Mocha Awesome Report. This links you to a web page that will show you the summary results. You'll see if everything passed or if it failed. Up here, where you can see in the right-hand side of the right screenshot, there's a little X with a 0 that will show you if anything failed. And if it did fail, you can see why it failed, which will make debugging much easier. And similarly, unit tests have a job that runs in the CI pipeline, and there's a summary, and you can click the link and see why the unit tests failed, if they did fail. So that's kind of just a standard operating procedure, what you can expect as you're developing. The question is what we call flaky tests. And a flaky test is one which sometimes fails and sometimes passes. Now, strictly speaking, a test that sometimes fails and sometimes passes is a failed test, but we just colloquially refer to them as flaky tests on the platform, and they are something we're trying to get rid of and have been trying to get rid of for a while, but it's a continual battle. Usually it's a question of asynchronous functions, and it affects unit tests and end-to-end tests. And the problem is that if a flaky test gets merged into a main branch, it can pollute branches that are then branched off from that main branch. You may be developing something and suddenly find your PR failing for reasons which have nothing to do with your development effort, but only because there's a flaky test. So everyone is encouraged to run their tests multiple times locally, test for flakiness before you push a PR. And there are a number of efforts on platform to stamp them out. There are jobs in the CI and the CD that are going to stress test for flaky tests and quarantine tests if they are found to be flaky. So it's a general phenomenon to be on the lookout. And in the future, in the relatively near future, if you have a flaky test in your application, you may be prohibited from merging until that is fixed. So even beyond the collaboration cycle, you might not be able to make progress with your development until you fix that. So it's something that platform is serious about addressing, and it's definitely best to confront head on and to make your life and everybody else's easier. There are additional resources on the platform that can help you develop your tests, Cypress best practices and unit test best practices. These pages, these documentation pages will give you some tips. They will link to tools and utilities that have been written that will help you and facilitate your testing efforts. And we definitely recommend you check them out before you start writing tests. In general, apart from the documentation that has just been talked about, you may need help, and you're encouraged to reach out to create a support request in the VFS platform support Slack channel. We will do our best to respond and get you back on track as soon as possible. And now is time for a questions and discussion. But since no one is here at the moment, I will end the presentation, and I want to thank everybody for watching. And again, feel free to reach out if you have any comments or questions on Slack. Otherwise, we will see you in the collaboration cycle. Thanks.